Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to another critique of the week. It is Friday, March 7th. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's see who we've got in the house. We've got Hemant Malik is here. And somebody just mentioned Hemat's got a poem in the new issue of Rattle, which is just out. If you haven't checked out the new website, too, check out the new website. Go to rattle.com. And let me show you. This is... Oops, we lose the music. I forget about that fast. But anyway, go to rattle.com and you'll see this. You scroll all the way down. We got the new issue right here. And Hemat's got a poem in this new issue. It's a little big picture here. But anyway, order the copy, subscribe if you haven't yet, and you'll get a copy of the new issue, which has Hemant Malik in it. Let's go back to the music. Is the music going to start again? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Hemant Malik is here. Let's see. We got Mark Grenier also, Steve Harrell. Lynn Schilling is here. Dr. Q, Rose Lennard is here. Staying up late over in London. Brian O'Sullivan here. Brian O'Sullivan on the Poetry Space. Of course, we just dropped another episode of the Poetry Space. That's Katie Dozier's show. I co-host along with her. And if you like the critique of the week, what we did this week on the Poetry Space is sort of workshop and talk about in depth. I think we covered maybe 6 poems or so. Some poems that we loved, one poem that we didn't. I think maybe that's going to be in part 2 next week, actually, but we'll talk about that. So, so Brian O'Sullivan's part of the squad, and he participates and adds some great insights into the poems, of course, the professor. Jamie Thomas is here. Let's see. Dick Westheimer, also member of the Poetry Space, who joined us for that episode. Check out the Poetry Space on iTunes.com or wherever iTunes is, or Spotify or SoundCloud or Amazon Music. Let's see. Shape Shoop is here. Patty Arbor, D. Coleman, Lori Flanagan, Desi Cochrane, Kimberly Gibson Trans here, Sharon Ferrante, Morgan Feeney, Amy Dower Solorzano, who also has a poem in the current issue. Both of them have wonderful Hyben. So check out Amy's poem in the new issue of Rattle. It just came out, number 87. David Boos is here. Shape of Soup, I might have said already. Rachel Grieve is here. Tom Barlow, Jamal Udin. Wonderful crowd on hand, as we always have. Just great poets. Janet McConaughey is here. All right. So, wonderful crowd over on YouTube. On Facebook, we've got Cindy Putnam Guntherman, who can't get on YouTube. Sorry, Cindy. Keep an eye on over here if you have any comments. And Bev Wendell Atherstone. Haven't seen you a bit, Bev. Good to see you over there on Facebook. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is what we always do on the Critique of the Week, which is look at poems in depth. If you'd like to submit poems, go to rattle.com/ it's kind of complicated. Right now it's /pages/critique. Soon it's going to go back to just being rattle.com/critique, we decided. And then poems are going to be in a poems folder. But for now, go to rattle.com, find the Critique of the Week up in the menu, and you can go to submit up to 2 poems for critique. And then we just talk about them live on the air. We try to be as friendly and as helpful as we possibly can. This is only trying to help poets get better at poetry, which is what we should all want to do. And so leave as many comments as you can as we go through, as we talk about these poems. We're going to go in the order they were received. But if you're somebody who participates regularly, we go to you first. And we've got a new face, and I've seen him a couple times on Critique. I don't see him this week. But we have a new poet who's been showing up on the Rattlecast a lot, Matt Joseph. And he submitted just a couple of weeks ago, or just last week, one of the poems he read on the Rattlecast and a newer one. So we're going to go to his first, and then we'll go back to poems in the order they were received. But let's start out with this. And there's a question, there's a general question field when you submit for Critique of the Week. And you can ask any general questions, point us in a certain thing you're really stuck on or thinking about or want to know, or you just hear some advice on. Matt left those blank, so just general, but he did say in the title, he says, give it to me straight. So he wants some honest truth about these poems, which we always try to do, but in the kindest way we can, of course. Okay, so here we go. This is Matt Joseph again, and Matt's from Santa Rosa, California. Let's take a look at what he sent. Over here. There we go. So this, you might remember this poem. I think you read this on the Rattlecast, like 2 weeks ago. Is sledding with my future wife as sophomores in college. And the prompt, what was the prompt? It was a memory you've never shared with anybody, I think. So that's the prompt for this week, or that week. And here's a poem. Sledding with my future wife as sophomores in college. A midnight golf course, mid-December, our two-handled saucers sluicing down the ninth hole's moon-crusted shimmer, the hiss of plastic on snow, and our breaths splitting the icy quiet like cordwood. Into before and after. First, our frozen descent, somehow pretzeling our two bodies to fit on that rudderless circular postage stamp. No control but our clinging to one another as we spun around halfway down to see where we'd come from. Backs facing the future, heading ass first into whatever came next, catching air, catching chance or fate or dumb fucking luck. Then, the two of us sprawled on that vast blank white slate like twin question marks, laughing into one another's open mouths, saying we loved each other. No, we were in love. Yes, that gave off more heat. Even that, not quite it. Two kids vowing silently to be the best pinky promise ever, to unlock the future together, to see what might lie inside. And now, 40 years gone, we've seen, and today our daughter called us to talk of concerts and classes and trying to put out our burning world. And later, our son to show us his new redwood tree forearm tattoo to remind him from whence he sprang. Wedged between this moment and that long ago, snowbound wordless pledge, the days have passed like a southward sky river of swallows, an endless swirl of change and becoming, and we suddenly find the sun falling fast. The star-pocked, promise-filled night rising faster. We hear the squeak of fresh snow beneath our boots, see the long hill sloping down and down into the sweet unknown, and there, resting against a tree, an old plastic sled, resplendent with cracks, hot pink, just as safe and steerable as any fine cafeteria tray, calling out our names, asking once again if we're ready for what comes next. So Matt read this poem on the Rattlecast, and I feel the same way I did at the time. He initially read it, which was that I love the details. I love the very beginning. The poem gets kind of slow, maybe a third of the way in. I start to get a little bit. It just sort of gets slow. We sort of get the point, and then it picks up again at the end. And so I really like the ending. And really, I guess when we stick to images in the story is when the poem is most vivid. And when the poem is most engaging. And we get a little bit sort of rambly toward the middle. So what I would work on here, just my take, and we'll see what everybody else thinks, is to cut out cut it down. I think maybe the poem could be half the length and twice as powerful, And so what I'd be looking for in this poem is what we can cut. And what to keep are the details that are vivid and concrete and bring the story to life. So I think we should go through again and just read. Maybe I'll look at the comments first, though, and see what everyone's saying about it. Let's see. Kimberly Gibson Tran says, the shape of the poem feels here. I'm not sure. I don't think anything is missing, so this is the best part. Cutting. Yeah, exactly. And Katie Dozier, who's right over there, says, totally agree. The poem is great on beginning and ending, about half the length, and we have a super strong poem here. Yep, exactly. So, Ali Rowland said, great imagery. There are points at which I'm a little lost a little. Then it picks up. When the snow isn't there, it's weaker. Yeah, that's a good way to put it, too. Yeah, the middle kind of dragged for me, says Winston Munn. Amy Dower Slorsno says, lots of gorgeous details, maybe trimming a little space for breath, if we can trim it down a bit. That's a good point, too. Okay, so we have a general consensus here. I think that's just what we feel as we read the poem. So let's see. So the title first, Sledding with My Future Wife as Sophomores in College. This is one of the tricks that we do, and it works so well. And if you talk about that Poetry Space episode, some of the great poems that we read had that aspect where the title just lets you know where you are, so you don't have to wonder. So we know Sledding with My Future Wife as Sophomores in College. It does a lot of work to tell us the story. It tells us what's going on. It tells us the who, what, where, and when. Right in one title, and so we don't have to feel lost. We're completely grounded in this moment, which is sledding with my future wife as sophomores in college. So we're right there, and then because we're right there, we don't have to. The details don't have to piece the scene together. They can be enlivening the scene and enriching the scene, which is what they do. A midnight golf course, mid-December. Our two-handed saucers sluicing down the ninth hole's moon-crusted shimmer. So very nice. The details are there, great. the hiss of plastic on snow and our breath splitting the icy quiet like cordwood. I mean, the great sounds too, splitting the icy quiet like cordwood. That those two C's, you hear that. Yeah, that's really wonderful. As you go down, you can almost hear that the sounds of the poem being like a sled. It's really, really wonderful sounds too. And you can tell that there was a real joy in putting this memory to words as this part was being written. So that's really nice aspect of the poem too. I should shrink this so I can see the comments as I'm babbling. Okay, that's better. So that's a really wonderful start to the poem. Where we go? So into, before, and after. First, our frozen descent, somehow pretzeling our two bodies to fit on that rudderless circular postage stamp. And so here's where it gets a little bit wordy and cluttered to me for the first time. I think first, our frozen descent. We already talked about the descent. So why not just jump? And then the somehow, there's that famous line from Ezra Pound where T.S. Eliot had, in I think it was The Wasteland, if I remember right, he had perhaps in there, and really angrily on the side, Ezra Pound, as he was editing The Wasteland, writes, "Perhaps be damned." And, don't say somehow. Let it be pretzeling. Just dump right into there. So we don't need this somehow. We don't need to soften stuff. Just, so cut this and just pretzel down. Pretzeling our, verbifying that word, pretzeling our two bodies to fit out that rudderless postage stamp. Then we stay right into the hard, good details, No control, but are clinging to one another. That's great, too, as we spun around halfway down to see where we'd come from. And so I think maybe, to see where we'd come from, that already is imbued with a sense of what comes next in explication. Backs facing the future, heading ass first into whatever came next. The where we come from, like, it's one of those really nice phrases where it both is literally what's going on in the scene and makes you think of all the other things that it represents symbolically. And so we can just end this stanza here, I think. And I don't think I'd go on any longer. And the poem, this is where the poem loses energy too, because instead of describing the scene and letting us feel as readers, the poem is trying to explain to us why it's emotionally important. But we know this is sledding with my future wife, in college. I mean, that's a huge moment anyway. And so when we see a phrase like where we'd come from, we know that you're thinking about the places you actually came from and the future that lays before you, and I think that's all there already. So we don't need to see backs facing the future, heading ass first into whoever came next, catching air, catching chance or fate or dumb fucking luck. Then the two of us sprawled on the vast blank white slate like twin question marks. See, that's nice. So maybe I would not end here, and I would save the two of us sprawled. So maybe just cut from here to there. And then I like the two of us sprawl on that vast blank white slate like twin question marks laughing into one of those open mouths. Saying we loved each other. No, we were in love. Yes, that gave off more heat. Even that, not quite it. Two kids vowing silently the bestest pinky promise ever to unlock the future together to see what might lie inside. So again, this is again another spot where it really loses momentum. I think laughing into one of those open mouths is nice. We could end it there and then move on. And now 40 years gone, we've seen, and today our daughter called us to talk of concerts and classes and trying to put out our burning world, and later our son to show us his new redwood tree forearm tattoo. Yeah, so the redwood tree forearm tattoo is a nice detail, and this sort of shift. One of the things, if you do watch that Poetry Space episode, it's on my mind because we just filmed it like yesterday afternoon or recorded it. We talked about, it was Nate Jacob, who's also part of the squad, and he talked about how in the Billy Collins poems, he has this sort of record scratch moment where it's like playing along and then something else, it's literally that like scratch sound, and all of a sudden you're going off in another direction. So now we have, and that's the same thing here with that. And now 40 years gone. So we fast forward really suddenly. It's like we're in the scene that you've built so well, and then we're fast forwarding. And that gives the poem a really great sense of movement, and then that can provide the meaning too. So it's really nice structure for the poem too. And I think going into a more casual conversational voice here works a little bit because we're reflecting on that memory now that we've painted it so vividly. So I think being a little more summarizing, even though we tend to avoid that and try to focus on concrete images, here's a good spot to do it and let us think about our daughter and and keep some of the details alive with that new redwood tree form tattoo. So this part is nice. Wedged between this moment and that, long ago, snowbound, wordless pledge, the days have passed like a southward sky river of swallows. And that's nice too. Although I wonder about the sky river of swallows. The image is nice, but does it really fit the theme, the scene of the snow and the sledding? I think it feels a little bit out of context there, like misplaced. And it is if you have where all the metaphors kind of relate and sort of feel like they're part of the same scene, makes the poem feel a little more complete. And so you have this snowy thing, and this makes me think of, maybe I'm wrong, but I think of swallows as like spring, summer, not winter. So that kind of takes me out of the season that the poem was like mentally in. But maybe I'm wrong about that. It could just be me. But anyway, so I'm not sure about that. But then the endless swirl of change and becoming, and we suddenly find the sun falling fast, the star-pocked, promise-filled night rising faster. That's nice too. We hear the squeak of fresh snow beneath our boots, see the long hills sloping down and down. So now again, we're getting into the images. And if you look back at the comments, this is where everybody reading was saying they were really engaged, at the beginning and the end. And because those details and the fluidness of the voice, the fluidness and the music through which all these really great, strong images were being produced makes the poem really engaging. So this is where it really works. See the long sloping down and down into the sweet unknown, and there, resting against a tree, an old plastic sled, resplendent with cracks. I love that word resplendent there. It's not often that you get to have that word work really well, but because it's like resplendent with something decayed a little bit, I think it works too. Resplendent with cracks, hot pink, just as safe and steerable as any fine cafeteria tray. And so that's nice. A little bit of humor there too. Calling out our names, asking once again if we're ready for what comes next. And yeah, I think that's really nice. So, so mostly it's just stripping out the stuff that you didn't really need, and letting us fill in the gaps a little bit for what the poem means. Let me see what everybody else is saying in addition to that. Kimberly Gibson Tran says the title "As College Sophomores" instead of "As Sophomores in College." Tighten it up a bit. Yeah, college sophomores would be a little bit better for the title just because it's quicker. And Lynn Schilling says, I'm not sure the title is just right. Yeah. Let's see. So Rose Leonard says the summer of their lives is over and hence the swallows leaving. Yeah, maybe. Is swallows more of a fall thing? Amy Dower Schlorzer says, to me, the southward sky river of swallows feels a little out of place and maybe a little bit difficult to say out loud. Maybe that's more my problem with that line. It just feels like it doesn't fit for some reason, and maybe it is the sound as much as the space. I don't know. I do think of swallows more as summer, though. I don't know. We'll see what you think about that a little bit more. That's one place I'd play with. Let me look over on Facebook and see what the comments going. Good. Cindy Putnam Gunther says, could it be parts about what kids are doing now? Or could cut parts about what the kids are doing now. Maybe condense that up a little bit. Yeah. And then Jenny Middleton says, I think the energy of sledding needs to move into the other imagery to make the poem more cohesive, more complete journey. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, so I think that's that poem. Let's see. So Morgan Feeney has an interesting question too. So I think the use of numbers here sort of throws me in places. We've got repeated uses of 2, which seems to fit with the theme of the poem, but then we've got 40 years. Biblical connotations, why 40? Well, I'd say, because it is 40 in the story, and that sort of places in time. I don't know. I didn't really have a problem with the 40. If anybody else has any thoughts on that, please leave them in the comments. Okay, let's take a look at the second poem by Matt. Yeah, so as we said at the time, I think if you look at what we said, we kind of comment on our favorite part of the poem, and we really like the ending and the images there. I think that helps it. The poem really works in that way. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the second poem that Matt sent. Uh-oh. Facebook, I gotta refresh. Hang on. There we go. Okay, this is Pyra Pyruloxia. That is a word I do not know. Let's see. I think this is a little too big too. That's a little better. Okay, let me Google this word because I don't know it. And that's what I would do if I could. Oh, okay. So let me try to look at the pronunciation. Pyruloxia is the desert cardinal. So it's a kind of bird, and it's the here. Might as well show you. It's the kind of cardinal. It's a little darker in the desert southwest. If you remember, I've definitely seen those before up in the mountains of Southern California. Okay, so that's the poem, and here is that's what the title means. Let's read. A name possessed by the red mohawked, blood-breasted cardinal, my birder friend and his son have been seeking in the clenched wilds of southern Texas. A scarlet heart flickering in the crisscross brittle of baked twig and toasted branch, secret winged by ruby waiting to be plucked. By their hungry eyes, and written in the leaves of their shared avian daydream. My friend tells me this as we huddle in our separate cars 2,000 miles apart, our voices bouncing from satellite to our phone's cold light and back as we wait for our sons to finish their first practices in over a year. The boy kicking a ball, mine dribbling, half-baked, half-mass, no contact. But at last, a chance for them to flock with their own species. We talk of our foiled plans to watch a foolish Formula car race in Texas the year before. Lost like so much else. So much more than mere plans, countless others swept away by this plague, the ones we know of, and all those we do not, their shadows suddenly filling our cars like smoke, the air dense with the last exhalation of their unfinished stories, so thick we both almost choke, and for a moment we are silent as the dead. Then we talk again, resurrecting the folly of watching overgrown children driving 200 miles an hour in circles. We press hard on the chest of our desire to see one another, to stand on the same piece of earth, share the same unmasked air. Up and down, we push to a steady disco beat, because that's how you do it, what they taught in CPR, how to keep it alive or bring it back from the dead. That thing passing between us, because what else is it, really, but the unpronounceable name of a flaming bird we are both desperately trying to find. Yeah. So the first comment I see is Jimmy Papa saying a COVID poem. And I'm not sure what he means by that, but I think when I see a COVID poem, as an editor, I have to say, I think, another COVID poem. It's one of those things. I started at Rattle not too long after 9/11. I guess it was 3 years after 9/11, but still, it was close enough where we're getting all these 9/11 poems all the time for the anniversary. And I remember thinking, really early, like, oh, God, another 9/11 poem. When we published a few, and I'm like, oh, this is the last 9/11 poem. Then eventually we published another one, and it's like, okay, this is the last 9/11 poem. And it's the same way times 10 with COVID. That first year of the lockdown and the Chapbook Prize, we probably 10% of the entries were called the COVID diaries or some variant on that. And so it is a topic that's just really oversaturated with poems. And so if you're going to be writing about COVID, you have to make it interesting and different somehow. I mean, there has to be a reason, it can be a personal poem that means a lot to you, but it's got to bring something new to the table, because it's one of those topics, poetry is the grand dialogue of our species. And this is a topic that's been talked to death. So my response as an editor is, here's another COVID poem. Although, I thought the same thing. If you go back and look at Molly Peacock's episode of the Rattlecast, I remember The Widow's Cranbox, her book that we talked about there. It mentioned COVID in the description. I was like, oh God, another COVID book. And then it ended up being a really beautiful poem, or book of poems about her husband's death during COVID and how she responded to it. And so if you're making it your own and making it interesting and using new, fresh metaphors like her Widow's Cranbox did, you can still find stuff of poetry in there, but it gets harder and harder every year, and as more people are writing the same stuff. So anyway. That's my talk about COVID, which I give about once a month. A little more from Janet McConaughey. Pyruloxia is a combination of the genus names Pyrula for bullfinches and Loxia for crossbills. The roots mean flame-colored and crooked, and aptly describe the reddish bird with a crooked bill. So, Yeah, very interesting. Yeah. Jamie Thomas says there's a lot to love here, but it meanders in a way that makes me unsure of what it means, which is preventing me from really connecting with it. Yeah, I think that too. So beyond the COVID stuff, there's parts I get engaged with the poem, and then it gets meandering in the same way the other poem meandered in that middle section. This poem has like different meanders and more frequent meanders, but a lot of meandering too. So let's read it again and talk maybe a little bit more as we go. Jesse A says I love that last stanza too. Yeah, and Rose Lunn says again, I love much of this rich and vivid. Yeah, when the poems are rich and vivid, the poem really works. And I think that's the key to take away from this is, self-monitor, as you're writing, Matt, and see those parts where the poems are being rich and vivid, and you're really great at that. So they come to life. Cut out the stuff that you're sort of rambling in between. And I think, and a lot of that is too listening to when you're connecting to that flow state and the poem's just kind of flowing out of you. There's a music that comes out subconsciously too, as the images. Or maybe it's because you're focusing so much on the image that it's like if you're playing guitar or something, because I know I'm a bad guitar player. Kitty hates when I say that. I'm an intermediate guitar player. If I'm thinking about it, it sucks. You have to be like not thinking about it. And the same way with poetry, the music comes out because it's bodily. If you're thinking about it too much, it's sort of your thoughts get in the way. And so if you're really focusing on the images, a lot of times the poem has a flow to it too. So notice when you're doing that and cut out the spots where you're not doing that. Is that just the main takeaway from this whole session here. Shape of Soup points out too, a bit adjective heavy rather than showing it distracts. And this is another talk we have occasionally, but adjectives are far weaker. Verbs and nouns are the way to go. Adjectives, are weak because they're sort of labels slapped on things, it just doesn't hold as much, and it's really the way our brains are structured for language, and that whole it's a long talk. We won't go into it, but adjectives, if you're describing through adjectives, that's the last resort of description should be adjectives. So keep that in mind too. Okay. So let's read it one more time, and we'll see where it's meandering, where it's picking up again. Okay. Pyroloxia. A name, and I like the word. I like the use of the word as the title because I was curious, Googled it, I got to learn something, and it sort of fits with the ending too. So I think it's a nice idea to structure the poem that way too. Again, a poem possessed by the red-mohawked, blood-breasted cardinal. My birder friend and his son have been seeking in the clenched winds of southern Texas, a scarlet heart flickering in the crisscross brittle of baked twig and toasted branch. Secret winged ruby waiting to be plucked by the hungry eyes. Hungry eyes is a bit of a cliche, and written in the leaves of their shared avian daydream. I think the plucked is nice, and the written in their leaves. The hungry eyes is a little bit something. I do something different there. But anyway, that's where we get good description again. My friend tells me that this as we huddle in our separate cars 2,000 miles apart. So the scene moves, but yet this still stays concrete for a little bit. Our voices bouncing from satellite to our phones, cold light and back as we wait for our sons to finish their first practices in over a year. His boy kicking a ball, mine dribbling, half-baked, half-masked, no contact. But at last, a chance for them to flock with their own species. To me, the flock with their own species is a little too forced into the theme of the bird. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what this comment is. Let's see. Mary Lee says, I think it means his friend tells him he's been seeking the bird. Yeah. Yeah, Shaver Soup says the title is good. The through line needs a compelling turn. Maybe that's a better way to put it too. About the poem's, it's like wandering because we don't really. It doesn't have a sense of where it's going or its purpose too. Yeah. Yeah, Chris Kaiser says first stanza could end at Texas. That's a strong opening scene and character. Yeah, I agree too. Okay, I'll keep reading. My friend tells me this. Oh, wait, I read that. Flock with their own species. We talk of our foiled plans to watch a foolish Formula car race in Texas the year before, lost like so much else. So much more than mere plans. Countless others swept away by this plague. And see, this is where I get really bored with the COVID stuff. I think at this point, maybe it's like the whole process of language and poetry really is a, creating metaphor, like taking concepts, putting them together to make new ideas, new mental models. We have this map of meaning that we have in the world, and we're putting new detail into this map all the time, and eventually it just becomes a label. And that's what, so a fresh metaphor is like a new synaptic connection that connects two disparate thoughts together in a way that's interesting and useful. And but eventually that's becomes so it's so common that it doesn't stimulate new thought. It becomes a cliche. And that's really the process of everything. And there's kind of a process too with poetry topics. And COVID has become a sort of, you don't need to say the whole thing, and it's sort of become a cliche, which means you can use it like a cliche. Cliches, I guess, have value, is something we don't really think about. But a cliche is something that you can just pull up really quick and say, this metaphor, it's raining cats and dogs, and we know it's raining a lot. It's a quick way to say that's a little more interesting than just saying it's raining heavy and sounding like Newspeak in 1984. It's double plus rain. You get a little bit colorful with it's raining cats and dogs, but you don't really have to use a lot of mental power to get that whole concept together. So with COVID, it's already this whole topic of COVID, isolation, lockdowns. We kind of all know because there's so much out there already about it. So I think you can just touch on the fact that it's the COVID era, and then we get so much more. There was a poem that we published recently. Is it in the forthcoming issue or just out issue, so it's not online? There's a poem, I think it was by Ron Kirchie, maybe, that mentions the mask and COVID just really briefly, and lets the poem just kind of exist as if that's like a given. And I think that's what this poem needs here. It's like, this is the time of COVID, say that some way, and then we sort of get the surroundings and we can dive into it a little bit more. Okay. Anyway, it's so much more than mere plans, countless others swept away with this plague. The ones we know of and all the ones we do not, their shadows suddenly filling our cars like smoke. Yeah. So I think this idea of like the dead and the thoughts of that filling the car is sort of an interesting take on it, and how it like looms heavy in the scene like a smoke. So maybe that's a part to include as we like sort of gloss over more of the COVID stuff. Yeah, Winston Munn says, why not simply say we talk about the pandemic and then move on? Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm kind of saying. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So touch on it so we get the context and then just keep moving. But anyway, the air dense with the last exhalation of their unfinished stories, so thick we both almost choke, and for a moment we are silent as the dead. And that line too has a nice power to it. So I like that the smoke and I like that little bit of it. So like if this was 5 lines of COVID, I think the poem would be much stronger. Then we talk again, resurrecting the folly of watching overgrown children driving 200 miles in an hour in circles. We press hard on the chest of our desire to see one another, to stand in the same piece of earth, to share the same unmasked air. Up and down we push to a steady disco beat, because that's how you do it. What they taught in CPR, how to keep it alive. So this goes on too long too. Because what else is it really but the unpronounceable name of a flaming bird we are desperately trying to find? And so I like the end. I like what it loops back to. Yes, I'm just not quite sure. As people have pointed out, there's sort of this poem sort of rambles and doesn't really seem to find itself. Although there's like it's like a really great frame, that doesn't have a great painting inside of it yet, And so it's really nicely framed, like going from the bird, thinking about the bird, the scene with the birding, and then ending on trying to find that flaming bird, the unpronounceable name. I think that's really nice too. Yeah. So I don't know. So it just hasn't found itself yet. So I think what I would try to do with this poem is start telling the story again and let yourself flow and let your mind make a surprising turn somewhere. Like go out of the car, do something different, remember something different. Have that record scratch moment we talked about with the first poem, and find out what your subconscious is trying to tell you about the scene, because it's really not there yet, So, but the whole shape of the poem is really wonderfully done. So it's really useful, thing you have set up, like a sort of apparatus. It just sort of needs to find itself, and it just hasn't yet. So, and it's the hardest type of poem to, workshop, because we don't really know what's missing inside the frame. We can just say it's a really wonderful frame. And then two, talking about the images are great. I didn't really notice anything. The grammar and punctuation is sort of straightforward. The line breaks, I think, are appropriate for this kind of voice, which is very casual. Even though it has vivid storytelling and a lot of good details, it's still a very casual kind of voice. So the sort of ragged, sort of free line breaks that are at appropriate places for the diction work really well. So I think, yeah. See if you can get it to 10 lines, says PMB. I think 10 might be tight, but we'll see. Chelsea McClellan says, I get the COVID point, especially for editors, but also having the feeling that it's more similar to everyone grieves. So no more grief poems. Instead, make it new, make it yours. Don't avoid it completely. Yeah, I think that's what I said, right? I mean, like the example of Molly Peacock. Go look at The Widow's Cranbox. Totally fresh and interesting, even though it's about that topic of loss and grief because of COVID. And so, you just have to find a way to make it rise above everything else, to be memorable. Because what we're really trying to do is put our voices on the table of that grand dialogue that is our species, and to have the voice that stands out and lasts. You have to make it stand out. And so, and finding ways to do that are original is really the key to it. So that's what I was saying. Not don't talk about it, but just, you're sort of, there's certain things that are, it's kind of like another metaphor, but like if you find a really great vein while you're a miner, there's like some great like line of gold, and you're just like pulling out this gold like crazy at first because no one's found it yet. But then once you pull out all the easy gold, the low-hanging fruit, I guess another metaphor, then it becomes more difficult to find the gold. You have to dig more. You have to put up more structure to get deeper under the earth and all that stuff because the surface stuff's already been taken. Sometimes it's a topic that hasn't been touched very much, and the gold is sort of like laying there on the surface. And sometimes it's already been mined, and you have to dig even deeper to get new, fresh stuff out. So maybe that's a good metaphor too. Okay. Anyway, okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to, now we're going to go to the oldest poems in the queue, but thanks for sharing those. So again, that was 2 poems. We talked about them a long time by Matt Joseph. Nice to see a new face that enthusiastically participates too on the Rattlecast. Let's go next. We're going to go to the oldest poem out here. And we were back at September 28th. I think we looked at this a little bit earlier because it was longer. We skipped it because it was the end of an episode. So let's take a look at this poem. We have 2, I think. A short one and a longer one. We'll do the short one first. This is Simron Xal from Edinburgh. And some questions. What are some tailored techniques that a writer can consider for different length poems? I have attached one extremely long one. Don't worry, it's not extreme, I wouldn't say. And another one that's much shorter, and I wonder how I can improve both considering their different lengths. Okay, so that's an interesting question, shorter versus long, and that's one I'm actually pretty bad at answering because I have trouble with I've never really written a poem that I was happy with myself that's more than like 2 or 3 pages, maybe 4 is max. So pushing poems far is not something that I tend to do myself. So it's hard for me to keep the narrative rhythm and energy going at that length. So it's hard for everybody too, I should say. Okay, well, let's look at the short poem first. And this is Peeled Orange. Okay. Peeled orange. See the orange peeled, eat the peeled orange. Wonder if my face peels. Who will eat this peeled face? Shall I just rot instead? See myself rot in my peelings. Eat a morsel of me. Wonder why I taste this way. Even I will not eat this peeled face. I shall just rot instead. So that's interesting. So, we don't usually have poems that are centered, which is sort of just a convention. I remember me, PMB, who's here today, funnily, arguing about it. It's just a convention, but there are specific reasons that it's just easier to read if you know where, because, your eyes track with ballistic movements. It's like, bam. Really quickly, and if you know where you have to go back to, you have this sort of touch place where it's a little easier to read, even though it seems like it's not a big deal, knowing where the next line is going to start because you start at the same point every time makes it a little easier to read. That's not why poems aren't centered. It was just easier with a printing press originally to put poems with a margin on one side. And so they tend to be that way, except, in more art books like, like Tiger Burning Bright, or why can't I remember his name? That dude that did those. Anyway, but the issue for the poem to me, it doesn't, it has this way where each line is sort of laid out as like it's a little statement. And William Blake. I don't know why I couldn't remember William Blake's name. So Kimberly Gibson Trent says, I want more orange imagery here. When I think of an orange peeled, I think of all the little white strings. And Dick Westheimer says, yes, about the centered. If you're going to break convention, it should serve the poem. Yeah. It's funny, we talked about Chesterton's fence a little bit on the Poetry Space yesterday too, and Chesterton's fence is the philosophical concept that if you see a fence, come across the fence in the woods, you don't tear it down unless you know why it was built, because there might be a really important reason. There might be a lion on the other side of that or something that can't cross a fence. And in this case, like if you don't know why poems are left margin, you just do it the conventional way because there might be reasons, and I think there generally are. Okay. Anyway, see the orange peeled, eat the peeled orange, wonder if my face peels. So these are little sentence fragments laid out with no enjambment, no sense that the syntax and the structure of sentences goes across the page. So it's sort of like they're each laid out like a little unit. Who will eat this peeled face? Shall I just rot instead? See myself rot in my peelings? So the poem doesn't have very much flow, I would say, either. And one of the real things that we connect with poems is a voice, is that sense that someone's speaking to us. And that breath, that person speaking, enters our body and we become that person. That's the intimate part of poetry. And when you get these poems that don't have that sense of voice because it's so fragmented as it's laying out, we just don't get that much connection to. So working on finding a voice, I think, would be an important thing. It's hard to make a poem like this really work. Let's, I don't know. So if we're going to write, Rachel Grief says, unsettling imagery. I think I want a little background of why the speaker's thoughts go in this direction. Yeah, we just don't have a lot to go on in this poem. Peeled orange. It's a strange place for to think of a peeled orange and then, your face peeling and then eating the peeled face. So there's that like cannibalism type thing there. Should I just rot instead? See myself rot in my peelings. It's strange. It's sort of evocative in its weirdness and its slightly disturbing nature. Eat a morsel of me. I wonder why I taste this way. Even I will not eat this peeled face. I shall just rot instead. Yeah. Jamie Papa says it's so weird I can't help but like it. Melody Bonilla says disjointed. Yeah. And Ollie Rowland says I struggle with rhetorical questions in poems. Yeah, too. And so there's a lot of rhetorical questions here. Desi Crane says, I do kind of dig how awkward it is. There is something appealing, a dad joke, about the poem and its strangeness. I agree. Not enough to make me want to read and remember it. I don't know. And so Chris Cutter says might work as a haiku. Yeah. And Kimberly Gibson Trent says a short poem should probably avoid this much repetition. Maybe that's a better technique in longer poems. And that could be too. I think because it's missing voice, it doesn't really, the fake of it or the I don't know, the shape of it doesn't really fit repetition as well. Yeah. And Amy Dower Slorzner says there's a quirky thought experiment type energy to this poem, but it isn't quite grounded in images or a scene. That's a good way to put it too. Yeah. So, yeah. Sharon Francis says, I like weird, but this needs something. I'm not sure. It's one of those things, maybe the title could help situate us and make us feel more connected to the content. I don't know. So we've said a lot about it. I'm not sure. It's an interesting road to go down, but I don't know. I think it feels like a dead end. Susie Carter says maybe sunburn. I think it needs more than sunburn. I think it needs some sense of, we have to connect with the speaker, who the I is, and we just don't yet because it's so... Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says it's giving a bit of Sylvia Plath in her Cut Finger poem. Her cut finger poem. I don't know if I know that. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Well, I'm trying to think of like a poem that works in this way, that I could share to sort of guide it toward that. But I can't really think of anything. Let me see if Cut by Sylvia Plath. Okay, let's look at Cut by Sylvia, and we'll see the difference. Why does Cut by Sylvia Plath work in theory, and this poem doesn't? Let's see. Cut. Is this really Sylvia Plath? Make sure. Okay. Yeah. Cut. What a thrill, my thumb instead of an onion. Oh, I remember this poem now. Yeah, it's a great first line. Once you see that line, you remember. What a thrill, my thumb instead of an onion. The top quite gone, except for a sort of hinge of skin, a flap like a hat, dead white. So here, see the difference already? This does have, it has the similar subject matter too. There's a little bit something macabre, a little grotesque about this poem. But we have an actual voice. I think that's first of all the big difference. It's not just, it's not lines laid out, in isolation. It's someone speaking to us, even though it's broken up by really short lines, so it's kind of choppy, got a feel. It's still a voice with diction, syntax that crosses over the line, breaks, and things like that. Anyway, except for a sort of hinge of skin, a flap like a hat, dead white. Then that red plush little pilgrim, the Indians axed your scalp, your turkey waddle, carpet roll straight from the heart. I step on it, clutching my bottle of pink fizz. A celebration, this is. Out of a gap, a million soldiers run, red coats every one. Whose side are they on? Oh my, homunculus, I am ill. I have taken a pill to kill the thin, papery feeling saboteur, kamikaze man, the stain of your gauze, Ku Klux Klan, babushka, darkens and tarnishes, and when the bald pulp of your heart confronts its small mill of silence, how you jump, trepan, veteran, dirty girl, thumb stump. So, you saw the vivid descriptions and the voice are the difference between these two poems. So, having that sense of the actual language, like we speak, write like you talk, is a mantra, but it's right like somebody could talk, and somebody could say all these things, and then have these vivid details that bring us into a scene and sort of light our imaginations up. And that's what the Cut by Sylvia Plath, it's hard to compare to Sylvia Plath, but that's what we're doing when we're trying to write a poem. We're trying to compare ourselves to Sylvia Plath. And that's done through having a voice that's consistent and feels like someone's actually speaking it, and then having a lot of detailed images that bring this poem to life. There's a lot of really surprising, startling ways of talking about this cutting yourself while cutting an onion. So, yeah. Anyway, that's that poem. Thanks for sharing that. Who was it that suggested that poem? Whoever it was a nice poem, and I hadn't read that in a very long time, so thank you for that. Yeah. I can't find it again. But anyway, thank you. Yeah. Kimberly Gibson Trent says, what's cool is the Plath poem is situated in the simple, relatable story of cutting a figure. Then it can get weird after we anchor the start. A finger, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Oh, it was Kimberly. Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. Okay. So let's take a look at the longer poem now. And the longer poem, don't worry, it's not too long, because it's got double sort of spaced and pretty big font, so don't worry. It's only 3 pages, even with this. Okay. To fame I am famous. Fame made tense under my skin and slept. It liked to take walks at night when it couldn't sleep. I could deal with footsteps under my skin, but when fame started to scream, I became ash in its burning voice. Fame faked night terrors just to get my attention. So I would throw blankets on myself. Why was I putting out fame fires? Why were the flames of fame lit inside of me? Fame was childish. It would hang off of my bones like they were branches. Bones snap differently to branches. It's more hollow crack and snap. It's more a remarkable crack and snap. A fame would write me these awful songs on the underside of my eyelids, then on my tongue. It sat and sang them. Fame was a daredevil who went bungee jumping in my throat, and when I refused for it to skydive from my highest point, it laughed in my face. My brain was the best plane. When fame tumbled and fell, I was the one who felt the bruisings. I was the one who felt the jabs of scrambled arms and legs. But fame did not make me famous. It just narrated to me the stories of framed fame. It told me to be careful, as if fame knew my fate from the start. I wasn't to be known by other people. Instead, I became the party clown in Schrodinger's box. My fate linked to a random event that may or may not occur. In the box, I met the cat. I was limping with raspy breaths, but very much alive. It told me we should get ourselves out of the box, then put everyone else inside of it. I always knew murder was a crowded room. Fame knew I was no one, but softened each new blow. Encouraged me to tell my rubber stories to bubble wrap brains, dressed me in candy bracelets, jelly rings, to let me sniff powdered sugar cocaine. I watched me get curious, hungry, and desperate, screaming the names of people I thought I could be. Fame played reverb over my truth. My only role is to observe, to clap, to be in awe of silk-wrapped silly string, the scribbles that never get scribbled out. Fame pitied how I was not watched, so it came to watch me itself. It came to ask me all the questions I was never asked, to laugh at all the jokes I would never get to tell. Fame fed my ego, who had been trying on costumes, running after spotlights. Schrodinger's cat taught me how to do that. Fame quietened the realization that I am row Z, seat 204. Fame let me make funny faces in the dark and move my jittery hands, all the while someone else was fucking the spotlight. Schrodinger's cat has more than one student. In my life, I have never seen anyone quite like me. Is that not the road to fame? The answer came when Schrodinger's cat appeared again, with hair he unclogged from his drain. Stuck in the tangles of hair were bits of food, bits of things I couldn't even name. He asked me what I thought of it, and I said, well, I've never seen anything quite like it. After that, I ripped at my skin, and now I am roaming around looking for a bin to put it in. Yeah. So, as Dick Westheimer says, specifics, we have no idea who the I is in this poem without tying him to the specifics of his life, his fame. And yeah, that's true. So we have this sense too. The other poem was much more disembodied, but this poem is also very disembodied. And, for a poem that talks about the self, it's sort of strange for, a poem that's self-referential with the I to feel disembodied, but it is, because we don't have a sense, like Dick said, of who the person is, so we don't have any way of understanding the context of it. But what you do get in this poem that you don't in the other poem is a sense of voice. Like, it's sort of like a voice floating and talking to us in the void. And as somebody said, Tom Barlow says, I do like the playfulness. And yeah, there's a playfulness to this voice that comes across. I like that aspect of it. To the original question, I think we could maybe have a good answer to that question of how to sustain things through short and long poems. I think the last poem, even if you're writing a short poem, make sure it has a sense of voice and a sense of who is speaking. You can look at something like, Kay Ryan, Mike White, Andrea Cohen are the sort of best contemporary, really short poem writers. Wendy Vitalock, if like meter and rhyme. And they still have a sense of voice and a sense of who's speaking and a sense of scene and story, even these small little poems. And I think that's what the first poem was missing, was the sense of voice. But you can see that there's a really nice voice in this poem. So it's not like it's that the poet is incapable of writing in voice. It's the short poem sort of strips so much out that it stripped out that too. So keep the voice in even in your short poems is the first piece of advice. But the second two, I think if we title this better, maybe we can situate it so we kind of get a sense of context and connect with it a little bit more. So maybe that's a way to add a sense of who the I is, but we do have a sense of it's difficult to connect because we don't have any sense of who the speaker is. As Petty Arbor says, though, I do love the passion. Yeah. Ali Rowland says it's difficult to personify an abstract noun and get away with it. It might be better if the character was not fame, but just a mischievous person. I don't know if I agree with that. I thought that a really nice aspect of it was the personification of fame. I thought because the voice is so playful and it's sort of clearly having fun with it, that the sort of absurdity of making there's who is that? There's a French absurdist short story writer, and I always think of this poem, or not poem, it's a short story, a really short story, about it's called The Nose, I think, and this just somebody wakes up and their nose is missing, and so they chase their nose all over Paris, and the nose kind of appears as if it's like a person, and it's just like absurd. I don't know. It's just very compelling in the absurdity of it. And I think that Gaugal, yeah, thank you. Desi Crane's like is my brain for today. Yeah, thanks so much. So yeah, and so I don't know that sense of sort of where the poem gets absurd because it's being so playful, and the personification of fame is I think that's part of a compelling part of the poem. Amy Dower Schloter says, I think I want just one character, fame. I think I want to let go of the cat. Oh, that's another thing. Thanks. It's a long poem. I kind of was forgetting some of the stuff. But yeah, when fame was in the Schrodinger's box, I like that. But the cat gets into kind of cliche stuff. So I'd focus focus on the fame and personifying, like run with that, like play with that as much as you can. I think it's really nice. Okay, we're going to move on so we can get to one more poet. But thanks for sharing this. Once again, this was Simron Xal. So yeah, I like the playfulness of this voice. I think combining the two poems is a good avenue to go. I think maybe to answer the general question, don't think of them as separate things. Like still use all the same elements and use this voice in short poems too, and that's a good way to go. Okay, let's take a look at let's take a look at another poem before we go, and next we will do. This is Mercy Mueni from Illinois. Mercy has 2 poems for us. They are also a bit long. And if you have questions, just let me know what I can improve on. Just let me know what else I can improve on. Just let me know what else I can improve on, and so on. Thanks. All right. Okay. I couldn't start the Alberton wildfires. Okay. And how long is this? About a 2-pager, but again, with double-spaced, sort of double-spaced lines, so it's really not as long as it seems. I couldn't start the Alberton wildfires. Smelling cigarette smoke makes the head feel light and dandy to me. It is so delicious, like candy. Nicotine is like a neat prize you find at the carnival, a slap-on bracelet that comes out handy. The fellows hold their burnt paper like guns, have a pocket pack of cigarettes like an arsenal. The ladies are downcast and reminisce every puff of gray cloud to something personal. Blue skies are always in contrast with a clash of orange and a blast of wildfire. Burnt wood is a horrible smell that makes the eyes dry out and the nose want to retire. Breasts ablaze in the 100 suns, humans are chased by a ravenous inferno. They are no different from rabbits being forced out of their burrow. While other eyes are drawn to the news, my eyes are wandering to the thick sight of CO2. Breaths in and out are gritty and sandy. Faces have a slight yellow hue. The firefighters give their cues to the others like soldiers out at war. Houses are reduced to black dust and soot, to nothing, and they can't face the horror. But I chant rain, rain, go away, though it seems to be the wrong season. I want nothing more than for third persons to see the reflection of fire in my eyes of treason. Is it really wrong for me to pray, Lord, you've brought fire at the right time? If the forest is my sorrow, it is being burnt to charcoal, such favors brought from crime. Yet even droplets sprout out of their heavenly cloud soil. Surely I am in sentiment of neither blue or rolling angry royal. The best day to go outside and find the tulips is on a rainy day, when the smoke is cleared and there's no sight of May Day in May. Let's see. Yeah, so Wayne the Poet says nice near rhymes. To me, the rhymes, like we have, they felt forced. Like they felt like the rhyme was sort of thrown in, and that was the thing that was, I guess the way to put it, and I've said this many times, is that you don't want to go for the first rhyme and right toward the rhyme. Yeah, Jimmy Papa says skip the rhyme. The rhyme throws the poem, throws us out of the poem, I think. I think what happens, and this happens a lot, is that you end up like accidentally coming up with a rhyme that kind of works, and you like it, and then you try to keep it going, and then it's just really not the right thing for the poem. And the thing you should do when you come across that, if the poem wasn't rhyming and all of a sudden you got a rhyme, you can't have a rhyme. The rhyme kind of ruins the poem, really. And so go back and edit out that rhyme. Don't like keep rhyming unless it's going to be a poem where you have a rhyme, you know what you're doing, you got meter going or some kind of sense of where the rhyme is. Yeah. As Winston Munn says, rhyming is driving this poem rather than used as a tool. When we say that, I'll try to explain a little bit more. So if we know we have to have a rhyme coming, we often go to a word we can connect to that rhyme, and then we write toward that. So we're sort of like, it's like crossing a stream by stepping stone over stone, and you're like, I need to go there, I need to go there. And you don't really get a sense of journey because you're only looking for the next stone. And so you can't let the rhyme guide your poem. Rhyme has to take you to surprising places, and you write with the rhyme and not let the rhyme steer you. If that makes sense. Otherwise, you just end up with these poems that just feel like there's no imagination involved because it's just the happenstance of language is what's pulling the poem forward. And that's kind of what happens here. So I think I think this is, and you see this often actually in submissions. As Kimberly Gibson Trent says, the first stanza was the strongest, I think. Some strong scene and character details. I wish we didn't abandon those characters in that scene. And what happens a lot of times in poems, you see this, is that we were going somewhere and then we got sort of distracted by this rhyme and started like running off in that direction. The rhyme just took over the poem. Choose the right word, not the rhyme, as Potter O'Donohue says. Good to see you, by the way, Potter. It's been a bit, but always a pleasure. Anyway, so I think for this poem, ditch the rhyme, and we got to talk about two things like the line breaks and the punctuation. Somebody said, why have regular commas and things, but not periods? And also, you got to think of the poem as a poem is a piece of musical speech. That's what it really is. And the poem on the page is the sheet music to that speech. And so what you're doing isn't really presenting the poem as the object. It's like the guide to how to make the poem happen. It's like the instructions for the miracle. We got a cool poem I like called Instructions for the Miracle. And but it is like the poem is the instruction to the miracle. It's not the miracle itself. And so you want to guide us through to make the energy that you can hear in your head and you would hear if you were reading it. You want to make that reappear in our body as we were reading it. And so that's why line breaks and punctuation and things that help guide us through hearing the poem as it is, giving ourselves pause at the right places to make the poem come to life as best as it can, that's really important. And so I think unless there's a really good reason, like that, go back to that Chesterton's fence again, don't cut out punctuation unless you have a really good reason to do it. Don't cut out the periods. They actually add something. And also line breaks. We have a lot of these line breaks in the poem where it ends on an article, an a, an of, and it really goes into the way that language is formed in our minds and how brains work, those language centers, but they're chunks of meaning that we come from it. It's why we talk about why adjectives are the weakest form of description. It's because we have these like ways that we chunk nouns is like the main thing. And then we add on top of those. So our brains are always trying to get to the noun in the chunk. And so if you have chunks that are sort of broken in half, every puff of gray cloud is like this unit, and you're breaking that unit, and it just makes it harder to pay attention and harder to read and think. And that's why we have the pauses in speech that we do, is because we chunk and unitize things in certain ways. And so having line breaks in the more traditional places just makes a poem easier to read. And so having the comma and then an article, it makes the poem choppy and hard to sort of pay attention to. PMB says should a bit is I'm not sure what he's saying. Yeah, he deleted that because it was a typo. In Tamala said that's why I like Spanish, where you get the noun first. Yeah, that's a good point. I think PMB, should a break be treated like a comma or not? Not in a syntactic way. You do pause a little bit because, like we were talking about, your eye has to scan back. And in that scan back, you get this little bit of reprieve. And so it's a good place to chunk out those scenes. As Tom Barlow says, the noun comes first in Spanish, and we add out the sort of constellation around that, the moons around a noun, or what adjectives really are, and what all the other articles are, those helper verbs and helper words and things. So having these like, really you can think about it like a moon, or like a planet with a bunch of moons around it, and the noun is the moon. And if you break the line, you're like leaving the moon kind of dangling, and it's hard to like resolve what it really is. It just takes more like mental power, and it's just harder to follow and doesn't sound as right because language has naturally put in some little breaks in between the little parts of the sentence. And so having the line breaks be where those natural, really brief pauses are. They're not really commas, but they could be. Like there could be some kind of, representation of those little pauses and how things are chunked, but that's not really the convention. And then it gets too much sort of a road with too many stop signs. But anyway, the line. So break your lines in places where there are natural sort of pauses and where our speech, and that just makes the poem read better. So that's another thing too to keep in mind. Amy Dower Slower says, I think some of the language used early on in the poem, dandy, neat, cigs, fellows, convey a certain time and place, which can add to the voice if it's sustained. That's a good point too. I agree. Line breaks create distinctions, make them matter. That's a good way to put it. Shape a soup. That's the kind of thing I was trying to say. You did it much more succinctly. Anyway, so I think that the poem, there's an interesting a playfulness and an imagination to the poem that works really well. And I think like having a little more structure and shape would help the poem come across better. On a deeper level, I'm a little hard to find, to follow a little bit. It feels like what's actually going on in the poem. Like we're so focused on the lines so much and the line breaks that we haven't really talked about the subject matter and how that's being treated. And I'm not sure, the story is a person who like what's the word? A pyromaniac. That's the word I was looking for. I kept going back to that word, that bird, the desert cardinal, pyrohaloxia or whatever. A pyromaniac, setting fires. Is that the right word? What's the word? What do we call people that start forest fires a lot? Anyway, firebug. That's the more common. Yeah. So somebody who's starting forest fires and enjoying it is what we're talking about here. I couldn't start the Albertan wildfires as the title, which is confusing to Tom Barlow. I'm not sure about the interpretation of the whole poem. To me, the poem, I couldn't start them, but I would have loved it. It's kind of my interpretation of the poem, but I'm kind of confused about it too. So maybe we have to read it again really quick. So smelling cigarette smoke makes the head feel light and dandy to me. It is so delicious like candy. Nicotine is like a neat prize you find at the carnival. A slap-on bracelet that comes out handy, and the fellows hold their burnt paper like guns. So they're good details. The carnival, the paper like guns. Have a pocket pack of cigs like an arsenal. The ladies are downcast, reminisce every puff of gray cloud, something personal. Blue skies always in contrast with a clash of orange and a blast of wildfire. Burnt wood has a horrible smell, makes the eyes dry out and the nose want to retire. Beasts ablaze in the 100 suns. Humans are chased by a ravenous inferno. They are no different from rabbits being forced out of their burrow. And this is where we get, I think that inferno burrow is a nice rhyme. There's a slight slant to it. It actually is a really cool words to rhyme together. And then that's where this introduction of rhyme sort of takes the poem off the rails. As Winston Munn says, consonants and assonance can add to the density to lines without rhyme. Yeah. We're just going to say that. The poem goes off the rails once we introduce the rhyme. So rewrite it, keep in the same voice. Imagine this as an actual person saying this and let the person keep speaking. That's what we're going to say about this poem, because it really goes off the rails at that point. And it's really hard to put together and hard to follow. And so much is driven by the rainy day, Mayday in May type rhyme stuff, and it just doesn't work. So it's a poem that derailed itself with this really wonderful, ironically wonderful rhyme, Inferno Burrow. If you want to write a rhyming poem, set out to do that and do, find, some meter, write a poem in some kind of meter with rhymes in places that are regular if you want to do that. That's what I would do. Okay, let's move on to the other poem and take a look. And I should say it's pretty late, but if you're still watching and you like this, make sure you click the like button. We have twice as many people watching still, even an hour plus into it, than have clicked the like button, so make sure you do click like. Okay, let's take a look at the other poem. And again, submittals make me refresh. Not the best advertisement for Submittable when that happens, but it is a nice... Okay. I, the Grim Lumberjack. And this poem is, again, it's a kind of long, but short lines with spacing, so we'll see. And this is the last poem we'll do today. I, the Grim Lumberjack. I came upon a fallen tree, one weeping to the side, sleeping cradled by its dear mother, branching to embrace alive. Blue stain, the color of midnight's eerie fungi. Is that supposed to be eerie? I don't know. A mother cradled her pale brown child, who fell beside her. Tree leaned, bruised and bare, of bark age 8, plus a decade more or less. Oh, sapling, a juvenile, the forest's greatest distress. I swiftly swung 3 cuts, crunch, chop, chop, 2, chop, 3. Rings cracked dry, I slammed it. The busted trunk produced putrid scents. Silent pleas, I forced it to submit to me. Then I tumbled on it, got up after, scrapped moldy wood, other parts stored for safe kept treasure. As tithe, I presented a gory gift, chunk of heartwood to my God. He cringed at the sight, wagged a finger refusal, rejected my thanksgiving that he peered upon with his sorry eye of pity. Don't say I told you so. With no warning, Mother Tree yelled at me. She gave me a piece of her mind when she toppled the slam and slammed her body against mine. My socket snapped, so she cried, "Don't hurt my daughter." Last breath she breathed, so I replied, "Miss, your offspring is carved to pieces on forest blue floor. Now you envy me as I carry an axe, and you have nothing, no more." Okay, so again, we end up with this floor more rhyme, which feels forced. So I'm a little confused by this. Morgan Fee says, I'm so lost. I don't know what's going on in this poem, really. I, the Grim Lumberjack. So at first, I, the Grim Lumberjack, I feel like I'm situated. I come upon a fallen tree. That's easy enough. One weeping to the side, sleeping cradled by its dear mother, branching to embrace alive. And again, so we're going to say again, write like you talk or write like someone would talk. Nobody would say sleeping cradled by its dear mother, branching to embrace alive. The sleeping cradled by its mother is fine, but that's not a natural way of speaking. Blue stain. And so what that does is it just throws us out of paying attention to the poem. It's really hard to connect with things when we don't have a voice we can connect to. And if it's not an authentic type voice, it makes it really hard to feel connected. Blue stain, the color of midnight's eerie fungi. Is that a thing is that a typo or is that like a type of fungus or something? Eerie fungi. Is that a thing? No. I don't know what that is. Eerie. Is that... Oh, okay. It's just the word eerie. Like creepy. Okay. Well, because it's all capitalized, midnight's eerie fungi, I was thinking it was some specific thing. But it's just eerie as an adjective, I guess. Okay. A mother cradled her pale brown child. And who's this mother? This mother appears. We had the lumberjack who fell beside her. Tree leaned, cruised. And then, so this is another inconsistent voice. If we were doing cruised and bear all the time, that would make sense. But it's just this, So I think that the biggest takeaway from this poem and both these poems is to, write like you talk, write like somebody would speak it to something to someone else. Imagine there's actually a person, sitting next to you, reciting you this poem. And hear that and see that in your head. And that'll really help the poem have a sense of voice, because the poem is very inconsistent in the way it handles language, which makes the poem hard to connect with. And so that's the first level. And things like, if you would say blue stain, the color of midnight's eerie fungi, you also wouldn't say tree leaned, bruised, and bare. Those are two completely different manners. They're two different registers of speaking, two different modes of engaging with the language. And it's fine if you have poems that are tree leaned, bruised, and bare, but that's not the same type of voice as blue stain, the color of midnight's eerie fungi. So pick one, and that's why it really helps to imagine a voice actually being spoken. Or say your poems out loud is another easier way maybe to put it. Just talk your poems out loud and make sure it feels like one person is talking it. There's one narrator, there's one speaker. That's why we say speaker in the poem so much. The speaker is there. In a poem, there's a voice and a speaker. That's really the heart of what poetry is. There's some different schools of playing with that. There's Gertrude Stein, language poetry, concrete poetry, and things. But for the most part, those are all, they wouldn't even exist without the context to play off of poems being a voice. So have a voice in your poems that's consistent. And then tell the actual story. There's some interesting things here with the lumberjack and the tree being cut down. There's a sort of a mythology going on. The lumberjack's chopping things. Tell it so that like think of it as an actual story that you're telling. Think of a person there has a voice telling a story in your ear, and I think we'll get so much more out of this. There's something there. There's some interesting details going on. There's some interesting scene playing out, but we don't really have a sense of what's going on. It's very disembodied and disconnected from us as readers because it's hard to follow. So think of it as the actual storytelling. Like if you're just telling a story, not writing a poem, how would you tell the story of this scene that's playing out before us? So yeah, let's see. I'll see if there's any other comments, then we'll move along. Yeah. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, so Dick Westerham says, friendly amendment, in a skilled poet's hand, more skilled than I, non-natural language can sometimes be used to undermine authority in some intentional way. Oh, yeah, well, I have to see examples. I mean, there is Tender Buttons is a thing, and it does some interesting things. There are poems that play with that. I don't know if it's about skill so much as, well, I mean, maybe the skill, but understanding the context and being able to write and understand other poems, because those kind of poems, that whole school of language poetry is playing off of what poems themselves do, and so you need to understand poems to sort of play in a meaningful way in that direction, is how I would put it. Amy Dower-Slorsno says, if the poet wants to lean into a fairy tale vibe, I think I'd want to experiment by cutting out the rhyme and focusing on the scene. Maybe a prose poem style could help with getting started. Yeah, that's a good point. Prose poems would be good too. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to move on from that. Thanks so much for sharing that, though. Once again, that poet was Mercy Mueni from Illinois. Thanks for sharing those two poems, Mercy. And that's going to... Was this... Did I go in the wrong order? No. Yes. Yeah, 20. Okay. So that's going to wrap up the show for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining. It's been a lot of fun, as it always is. This week's guest in the Rattlecast coming up is going to be Katja Kuipers. So Katja is a very interesting poet. Her newest book is Lonely Women Make Good Lovers. Katja is been in Rattle a few times with some really wonderful poems. Hurt Bone was the poem in the current issue or the winter issue. She was winner of that first book award from BOA Publishing, which is my favorite press, actually, and all of her books come out from BOA. That's my hometown press, and I really enjoy all the books they do. The other thing I know about Katja is that she was in a really cool writer's retreat, which I want to talk to her about, where she was really isolated in a cabin, if I remember right. So I want to look that up and make sure that's true, and I'm not thinking of somebody else, and talk to her then. Her book, though, is Lonely Women Make Good Lovers. That's the guest for this week. The prompt for this week was to write a poem about a time that you carried more than you ever thought possible and include a reference to temperature. So some interesting things to go on there. It's going to be a tough poem to pull up an old one and pretend it's new. So write a new poem. You should always be writing new poems because it's the whole point. But write a poem about a time that you carried more than you ever thought possible and include a reference to temperature. That's the prompt for this week. The guest is Katja Kuipers. And don't forget to check out the Poetry Space. Just type in the Poetry Space on iTunes or Spotify and stuff. That's me and Katie Dozier's podcast, where we talk with some friendly faces here, too, familiar voices you'll hear about poems. This week we did deep looks into some poems that were great and some that were not so great from famous or well-known poets. Really interesting to dive in and give it that deep analysis. It's called How to Read a Poem, and part 1 just dropped today, so check that out. And then check us out on Sunday for Rattlecast 284. That's March 9th. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.